I got a question from a follower asking who I consider to be the top 5 classic skiers of all time. So I thought, why not make a list based on fans' opinions? In this video, I will present the top 5 athletes that you guys have voted for, and I will also express my own reflections on the subject. In this breakdown, we will look at the peak of each athlete, and the main criterion is 10 and 15 kilometers with individual start. Starting with the number 5 spot, we have prime Petter Northug. The first poll I created was between Martin Lostrom and Dæhlie, where most of you had one clear favorite. Then it was Northug versus Martin, where most of my followers seemed to favor Northug. Later, I created 2 additional polls to double-check if you really consider Petter to be in the top 5, and apparently most of you do. What are my thoughts? Throughout 95% of his career, he doesn't even come close to making this list. However, he has one performance that really stands out, where he was just on a whole other level as compared to any other Northug before or after. And that race is of course from Finland in 2013. I honestly don't know what happened here, but he just demolished the competitors by a margin of 35 seconds, which is quite substantial considering the level of competition. Those days where everything just works perfectly can come unexpectedly a few times throughout your career. This seems to have been one of those days where he exceeded his own standards. Even though that race was astonishing, I would be very skeptical about including Northug in the top 5. There have been many outstanding classic races throughout history, and I am somehow not really convinced. If he's in the top 5, it would be a very, very weak 5th place, and I think there is a massive jump from the number 5 on the list to the top 4 guys I'm about to present. Moving on to the number 4 guy on the list, we have prime Martin Sundby. As you can see, most of you have him as the heavy favorite over Petter Northug, which makes total sense in my eyes. Martin's VO2 max is slightly lower than some athletes in his peer group, and that weakness is clearly visible when they do uphill running during fall, but he's just so powerful at double poling. In 2020, he averaged the number of 390 watts for 16 minutes on the ski erg, which sounds just absurd to even say. There are many variables that determine a classic race, but one factor is how much double pole power you're able to produce over longer durations. If someone has you beaten by a significant margin in this department, it's hard to deal with. Being as brute strong as Sundby in the gym has of course some kind of carryover. He also had a perfected classic technique in addition to a super high utilization rate. If you divide 390 watts by 72 kilos, you get 5.4 watts per kilo. I think it's safe to assume that if you only look at relative power outputs, there's no one who comes close to those numbers, but a classic race is not just about that. He was of course extremely fast in all aspects of the classic style, also on the climbs. But I think the fact that he's the only skier from the World Cup to ever win a ski classic race using only double poling confirms where he was truly superior relative to other world-level skiers. In his best race, he beat Niskanen by 37 seconds after taking it easy on the last lap. How does it match up against the best forms of the remaining athletes on this list? Hard to call it, as it could go either way. At 3rd place, we have prime Alexander Bolshunov. This poll was closer, but still people favor the Russian by no surprise. Bolshunov also possesses big upper body power and is technically flawless in the diagonal stride. Out of these 5 athletes, he has the longest strides, and trying to keep up with him on a gentle uphill feels a bit like trying to follow Pogačar as he smashes watts on a climb. Maybe you can do it for 200 meters, but then you're done. Being as powerful as he is, one would assume that his raw numbers on the ski erg would be pretty outrageous too, although I don't have the data. How well these athletes would do against each other would largely depend on the course and the conditions. On a relatively flat course with firm conditions, the best version of Bolshunov could emerge as the favorite in my opinion. However, looking back on his results in the World Cup, I have to admit that I may have overestimated Bolshunov's capabilities a little bit in the past. Most of the races he won, it wasn't really by those enormous margins, of course with a few exceptions, but I felt as though a small correction was needed. Bolshunov was good, but certainly human. Taking the place of the number 2 classic skier in history, we have prime Johannes Klæbo, who is widely regarded as the greatest skier of all time. Versus Bolshunov in the classic style, apparently most of you seem to think that this is a mismatch in favor of the Norwegian. Klæbo does things that shouldn't even be possible, like being in a league of his own in the skate sprint, and at the same time dominating classic distance races, which is the complete opposite discipline demanding entirely different skills. You can't appreciate enough how much of a freak this guy is. In the classic style, Klæbo normally becomes even more dominant when they encounter challenging conditions such as deep snow, where there is a greater demand for technical efficiency, just as we witnessed in the World Championships. He's like an artist on skis, and technical skills matter even more in those types of conditions. Klæbo's double pole is of course very strong, and I can see him doing very high numbers on the ski erg, but I can't imagine anything like Sundby's numbers, so it makes sense that his advantages lie in other areas. I found a total of 10 individual start classic races that Bolshunov and Klæbo both participated in. Bolshunov beat Klæbo 6 times, and Klæbo beat Bolshunov 4 times. But the thing is, Klæbo may have reached his peak after Bolshunov had to leave the World Cup. Some of the classic races he showcased in the last 3 years have been pretty wild, like winning by margins up to half a minute. In these snowy conditions, I can't see any way Bolshunov or Sundby could have dealt with Klæbo. Put them against each other on a different course with icy conditions, and it might be a different story, because that's where they could utilize their strengths. Klæbo also has other advantages over the other guys on this list, like his tremendous speed, accelerations, and descending skills. No one is capable of gaining more free seconds on those downhills and turns than this magician of a skier. Overall, I don't have any problems with people having this guy as number 2. I consider Johannes Klæbo to be the favorite against every single person on the planet. Every single person except for one. And that person is of course Iivo Niskanen. As you can see, most of you are convinced that the best version of Niskanen beats the best of Klæbo. Against Niskanen in his specialty field, I'd say everybody's the underdog. I've always believed that the ultimate skier would be the one who can combine old-school physical attributes with modern technique, and in a way that's what he represents. His VO2 max may very well be the highest among today's athletes, and he has arguably the best classic technique as well. Previously on this channel, I compared all 24 classic mass starts and individual starts that Bolshunov and Niskanen both participated in. The record was 12-12. But if you look only at the races with individual starts, out of a total of 15 races, Niskanen beat Bolshunov 10 times, while the opposite happened only 5 times. I discovered the same thing when analyzing Niskanen versus Klæbo. Including both mass starts and individual start races in the classic style, it was 16-16. But looking only at individual start races, the record was 14-7 in favor of Niskanen. This data confirms that Niskanen wins the statistics against both Bolshunov and Klæbo by a solid 66.66% margin over both of them, so I think it's fair to assume that you guys are probably right on this one. But I want to add that it wouldn't surprise me one bit if Klæbo's peak level from the last 3 years is somewhat comparable, if not better than the best of Niskanen. There is a possibility of that. Based on the fact that Niskanen's maximal oxygen uptake and his diagonal stride are his biggest strengths, one would assume that he will do best in challenging courses with quite a bit of elevation. His double poling is also very, very strong, of course, but if one were to categorize these athletes into 2 main categories, the double polers and the striders, I would say Niskanen and Klæbo fall more into the category of diagonal stride dominant, but all 4 skiers are exceptional in all part techniques. And what I'm talking about here are only marginal differences one way or the other. There is a possibility that the order in which my followers have ranked these athletes is 100% accurate, but there is also a possibility that it's not. Unfortunately, we will never know. But I feel like I have to include a bonus chapter in this video, because there is something that just has to be said. I just want to put it out there. You might think I'm crazy for saying this, but it wouldn't surprise me if the best version of Dæhlie could have been in the conversation. The speeds those guys had in the uphills were insane. Their PRs in running were faster, their VO2 max tests were better, and they did more hill running with poles all year round. Where he obviously would have lost time would have been on the flat double pole sections, as the evolution of that technique had not progressed any further. In a hilly course, there is a possibility that he could have been that much faster in the steep sections, that the total time of a race could have been faster, despite losing time on the flats. I'm not saying it's a likely scenario, but what I am saying is, there is a possibility that athletes from the 90s like Smirnoff and Dæhlie could still have been competitive on hilly courses, although it can never be proven. The fact that as much as 17% of my subscribers believe Dæhlie from 1997 would have finished outside the top 30 in 2025 is almost hair-raising.
Med så jævlig mye tøffere nivået nå, om han hadde konkurrert I dag, kanskje han hadde vært topp 50.
You need to educate yourselves. There have been many great skiers throughout history, and do not think the best classic skiers from the 90s would look pathetic in 2025, because that's just completely delusional. If you check the average speeds from the 90s, you will quickly realize how fast they were. Yes, I know there were snowy conditions in Trondheim in 2025, so I don't use it as evidentiary data, but still, nearly a 5-minute difference tells you that they were certainly not the kind of noobs the way some of you believe. But overall, except for Northug at number 5, I think your list makes sense, and I want to say thank you to those who voted, and I'll see you in the next video.